Costco is now the biggest retailer to sue the Trump administration in an effort to preserve tariff refunds. We're waiting on a big Supreme Court decision.
The clear majority, 62%, oppose new tariffs. That favor number has absolutely plummeted down to 38% on the 72% of Americans believe that tariffs raise prices in the short term in March.
They're arguing in this lawsuit that the president exceeded his authority with tariffs. They want full refunds, and Costco
when other companies did not. A battle may be brewing.
Yes,
definitely.
We stand at a hinge moment, a moment where the truth cuts through every political slogan. A moment where one side calls tariffs smart leverage, and the other side shows how they crush families already fighting to survive. The gap between claim and reality has never been wider, and nothing exposes this gap more clearly than the contrast in the words you're about to hear.
I want to start this conversation and talk to you about tariffs because I think almost singularly it's the biggest shift in the United States and really the global economy, and it's a philosophical choice and a practical shift. And I want to understand your thinking, and I'll tell you why I want to understand your thinking about this, because when I went back and was really looking at sort of how your own thinking has evolved, it clearly is different today than it was before you were the Treasury Secretary. So back in 2024, this is long before Trump had won. By the way, you had predicted he was going to win. And this is long before you were the Treasury Secretary. You wrote an investor letter while running Keybridge. And you wrote the following. One of your differentiated views that we have is that Trump will pursue a weak dollar policy rather than implementing tariffs. Tariffs are inflationary, you said, and would strengthen the dollar. Hardly a good starting point for a U.S. industrial renaissance.
Costco is now the biggest retailer to sue the Trump administration in an effort to preserve tariff refunds. We're waiting on a big Supreme Court decision, which may or may not declare many of the president's tariffs not legal. But what do the American people think now about the tariffs? One man has the answer. CNN chief data analyst Harry.
We're number one, and I'm one man.
All right, talk to me about right now views of tariffs, broadly speaking.
Yeah, this is a topic on which the American people have shifted significantly, and they have shifted significantly against tariffs.
These two voices collide like two different versions of America. One version praises tariffs as if they are a masterstroke guiding global strategy. The other shows a courtroom reality where some of the country's biggest companies argue that these same tariffs might not even be legal. This clash reveals a deeper truth. The policy that was sold as economic strength has become a symbol of instability. When businesses like Costco challenge the administration, they're not trying to score political points. They're trying to survive unpredictable rules that shift without warning. Families feel the same shockwaves. Tariffs were described as a path to growth, yet people see rising prices on essentials they depend on. In a time where affordability is the top concern, the idea that these tariffs could be harming the very people they claim to protect is a warning sign we can't ignore. Strong economies rely on trust, clarity, and stability, not chaos dressed as strategy.
President Trump has normalized the idea of a 15 to 20% tariff. And I think what goes, everyone likes the hysteria of prices and this and that. But what has gone unnoticed is USTR Jamison Greer, with President Trump's support, has done an incredible job of dropping the non-tariff trade barriers and the tariffs from other countries. So when you see this deal and you say, well, Indonesia has agreed to, and by the way, Indonesia is getting a little recalcitrant here, but a good actor, Malaysia, has agreed to do this, they might have dropped 8,000 lines of tariffs. So U.S. business, it's actually flowing much better.
By late October of 2025, the clear majority, 62%, oppose new tariffs. That favor number has absolutely plummeted down to 38% on the key policy that Donald Trump has been pushing since the beginning of this second term. The American people have shifted completely against the president of the United States.
That's just a complete reversal right there. How about Americans' approval of the president on the issue of tariffs?
Yeah, this issue is dragging Donald Trump down. Because why? What are we just looking at here? Trump's net approval rating on trade/tariffs. In January, it was okay, right? It was doing okay. It was -2 points. But in this political environment and the fact that polls oftentimes underestimate Donald Trump, this ain't too bad of a number. Look at where we are now. -24 points, a shift of 20 points. away from the President of the United States. I was looking at data around this point in his first term. This is double digits worse, as well as he was at this point on trade and tariffs, as where he was in term number one at this point. The American people have moved against tariff, and they have definitely moved against Donald Trump.
The distance between political optimism and public experience has rarely been this wide. One voice insists business is flowing much better, while the public response reveals the opposite: a collapse in support, frustration with rising costs, and a sharp decline in trust. When 62% of Americans oppose new tariffs, it signals more than disagreement. It signals lived experience. People notice when their grocery bill climbs, when imported essentials cost more, when every paycheck stretches a little thinner, and when a president's approval on trade drops by 24 points. It shows Americans are not buying the narrative of temporary pain for long-term gain. What Bessent calls normalized tariffs feel like normalized pressure on household budgets. Fear of inflation isn't hysteria, it's a daily reality. A policy that was promised to empower the nation now feels like a burden placed directly on ordinary families. That is not strength. That is strained.
Evolved on this, and that the president's been right. And the president has I've said it publicly, the president has a much higher risk appetite than I do. And my evolution went to, well, I think we should do smaller incremental tariffs. And the president went in with a maximalist position, and that is actually what gave us the leverage in the negotiations by saying, okay, you've got a 35% tariff when Japan agrees to a 15% tariff. It's domo arigato. Thank you.
Why has there been such a reticence for the administration to say, you know what, we're going after these tariffs. We think they're bringing in a lot of revenue. We think it's good for labor. And you know what, it might have an inflationary impact, and we're cool with that.
No, Andrew, first of all, I think in your mind, what's inflation?
72% of Americans believe that tariffs raise prices in the short term in March. You come over to October, Donald Trump's been making the argument, and the American people ain't buying it, Johnny Berman, ain't buying it. 71%. It is awfully difficult when the number one issue in the country right now is inflation, is affordability, and folks believe that a signature policy of yours increases prices. That is no bueno. That is no good. No wonder Americans are moving against tariffs and moving against Donald Trump on tariffs.
Here lies the sharpest contradiction. One side describes tariffs as a tool of leverage, revenue, and labor strength. The other shows the public overwhelmingly saying tariffs raise prices. When 72% of people agree on anything in a divided nation, it means the evidence is visible in everyday life. Gas prices, groceries, clothing, electronics, small increases become painful when stacked together. The idea that tariffs generate revenue sounds appealing, but that revenue comes from higher costs paid by American consumers and businesses. Ordinary families are funding a policy they never asked for and no longer support. And when inflation is already the top issue, adding new pressure is more than an economic mistake. It becomes a moral mistake. Leadership means protecting people from unnecessary harm. But this approach shifts the weight downward, onto those with the least margin of safety. Smart policy builds stability. These tariffs build anxiety. Strong nations don't prosper by squeezing their own people. They rise by empowering them. When a government claims that pressure creates strength, but the country feels only rising fear and rising bills, something deeper is wrong. The story of tariffs is no longer about economics. It has become a story of power, pressure, and intimidation. And that truth becomes clearer every time these voices collide.
China is a very different economic animal, and they are willing to subsidize labor, subsidize production, subsidize capital. And because of that, they depend on this export economy. And I think if you were to look, the Chinese consistently, on the Chinese portion of the imports, the Chinese have consistently cut prices. But
you don't, look, I mean, this is...
And I don't believe tariffs are a tax. attack, but I was surprised. I got a couple of the Democrats to step into the bear trap. They said, well, tariffs are attack. They said, okay, so you believe tariffs are attack? Yes. You believe tariffs are inflationary? Yes. So you believe taxes are inflationary?
Tariff stimulus checks are sent to Americans by August of 2026. It's a 25% chance. That's a 1 in 4, so that's not nothing. But the American people right now are craving some relief, and at this point, it doesn't look like it is coming. Although I will note, John Berman, this 25%, it is greater than this 6% who say that tariffs decrease prices, or that 5% back in March, which are just, you never see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5%. So look, 25% ain't nothing, but at this point, it's low.
These two statements reveal a divide between theory and reality. One view tries to reframe tariffs as a clever tool, arguing that China absorbs the cost and that Americans worry without reason. But the public feels something different. They feel prices rising, wages falling behind, and relief still far out of reach. When only a 25% chance exists that tariff rebate checks will ever arrive, it tells working families exactly what they already know. Promises come easily, but help arrives slowly, if at all. The claim that tariffs are not a tax ignores the truth visible in every American household budget. Higher import costs translate into higher store prices, and those increases fall hardest on families with the least financial room. The idea that China cuts prices may sound comforting, but it doesn't match the lived experience of millions of Americans who see weekly expenses creeping upward. A strategy that leaves people struggling is not a strategy. It's a warning.
The hearing was very different, very different. When Amy Coney Barrett said that if we undo this, it'll be a mess, it was taken as, oh, it'll be a mess. She actually meant it as, we've got to be very judicious, which I assume the Supreme Court would be, but they've got to be very prudent about doing this. Right? And I just saw that Costco is going to file for a refund. Okay, tell me what kind of refund Costco's due if the foreign producer lowered their price, they've taken a deduction, right? They've taken a deduction on having paid the tariffs. So, and I am optimistic on this. Everyone says it'll be a loss for the administration. I think it'll be a loss for the American people. And
but if you lose, what do you do?
But the ultimate goal here, that the revenue, and I have been very consistent on this, that tariffs are a shrinking ice cube. The ultimate goal is to rebalance trade and to bring back domestic production.
Big business has been kind of tiptoeing around the Trump White House all year, right? CEOs of public companies, they've been very reluctant to battle a president who has not been shy about retaliating. Even when the president launches policies, they're going to hurt their bottom lines, right? The thinking has been, yes, tariffs might shrink their profits, but these CEOs also have mergers that they want the administration to bless, and they don't want to invite regulatory investigations. And so, yes, that's why this Costco lawsuit is so noteworthy.
This exchange exposes something far more serious than a disagreement over economics. It shows how fear has become part of the country's business environment. When CEOs hesitate to challenge harmful policies because they fear retaliation, that is not a healthy economy, that is an intimidated one. It means decisions are not being made freely, but under pressure. Costco stepping forward is significant not because it is a large company, but because it breaks the silence others feel forced into. At the same time, calling tariffs a shrinking ice cube suggests the policy is temporary and reactive, not stable or strategic. Businesses and workers cannot plan their future around shifting rules that depend on political mood swings. Uncertainty weakens investment, weakens hiring, and weakens confidence. Strong economies depend on clear rules, not fear of punishment. When companies feel threatened by their own government, the foundations of growth begin to crack. Stability and fairness become the true casualties of such policies.
The AEIPA authority gave the president and our team much more negotiating room, and let me tell you, there were plenty of other times, and I said it several times, if AEIPA is an emergency power, if the fentanyl crisis wasn't an emergency power or an emergency, then what was? Now, because of the fentanyl tariffs, the Chinese are making the step forward that they've made in I don't know when fentanyl came on the scene. They are making a robust effort to redo that. That on October 8th, when the Chinese announced that every product in the world that had a 0.01% rare earth Chinese content needed a license, President Trump was able to threaten them with a 100% tariff. They immediately came to the negotiating table. That's emergency authority.
They're arguing in this lawsuit that the president exceeded his authority with tariffs. They want full refunds, and Costco did not hold back in this lawsuit, right? They argued that Congress really has to provide guardrails to a president to apply tariffs, right? And they say that the 1977 law that the president is relying on, AEIPA, provides no such guardrails. And to make their point, they effectively said, if you don't believe us, just look at the mess that we're in. The lawsuit says the pell-mell manner, they point to the pell-mell manner by which these on-again, off-again AEIPA duties have been threatened, modified, suspended, reimposed, and the markets gyrating in response. If that's not poking the bear, I don't know what is. But look, Sarah, Costco, they can read the room, right? Yeah. They know that even though President loves tariffs, the public does not, right?
Here the stakes rise even higher. One side frames emergency powers as bold leadership, a way to force action and pressure foreign governments. But the other side warns that without guardrails, those same powers become dangerous. When a president can declare sweeping tariffs under emergency authority, markets react with fear, companies lose clarity, and ordinary workers feel the consequences through unstable prices and uncertain jobs. Emergency tools are meant for real crises, not everyday policy. If they become routine, democracy weakens and economic stability collapses. Markets gyrate because they cannot trust what rule will come next, and unpredictability is poison for growth. Families end up paying the price for political theater, and businesses operate in a fog of doubt. Strong nations don't run on fear. Strong economies don't depend on threats. And policy without guardrails becomes power without limits. The country deserves stability, not sudden shocks disguised as strategy. A nation moves forward when its leaders choose clarity over chaos, stability over shock, and trust over fear. But the tariff battles unfolding today show an America caught in uncertainty, economically, politically, and even strategically. This moment reveals what happens when power is used without caution and policies shift faster than families can adapt.
Side, my least favorite word in journalism is could, because when a journalist has no story, said, well, they could. So
but that's why Taiwan's spending all the money that they are. That's why they're wringing their hands. They're worried about something that could happen, and they don't know whether we are really an ally of theirs or not.
The United States is an ally of China. The relationship remains unchanged.
For some of the companies that are already suing the administration for a similar thing. But it is fascinating to see the way Costco is moving. They also did the same thing with DEI, where they doubled down when other companies did not. A battle may be brewing.
Yes.
Definitely. All right. Thank you so much, Matt Egan. Appreciate it.
These two statements show how uncertainty has become part of America's political landscape. When even allies don't know whether we are an ally, it reflects a deeper crisis of confidence. Tariffs were supposed to show strength, but instead they've created mixed signals abroad and fear at home. As companies like Costco take rare public steps to challenge the administration, the sense of conflict grows. A battle may indeed be brewing, not just in the courts, but in the economy itself, where businesses face unpredictable rules and unclear long-term strategies. When leadership sends confusing messages, global partners hesitate, investors back off, and supply chains weaken. Meanwhile, families face the everyday consequences of rising prices and shrinking stability. Prosperity cannot grow in confusion. Economic security demands consistency, reliability, and trust, qualities that disappear when policies shift so often that even America's closest partners question where the country truly stands. A nation that relies on hope instead of clarity risks falling behind.
I think that we can see a cadence that's developing. I was back in my hometown of Charleston, South Carolina, and the Boeing plant is there that builds the Dreamliners, expanding by 50% because of the foreign investment that is part of the trade deals. We have negotiated, President Trump has negotiated 1,000 the new Boeing airplanes. So we are getting into this cadence that with pharmaceutical pharmaceutical reshoring, with semiconductors. Apple has said that they are going to, I think we're up to $100 billion now. So, I think that we have set the stage and we have these commitments, and those commitments are due to certainty on tax, certainty on energy, certainty on regulation.
But you think, I guess my question is, the administration has talked about $21 trillion in investment being made in the U.S. This is according to Bloomberg, so you can go after them if you want to go after them. They say over a review of the 137 projects on the White House's webpage, they believe there's only $7 trillion in pledges that could be considered real investment.
Well, first of all, let's go back to that.
Okay.
Only $7 trillion. Say that again.
By the way, I'm not dismissing $7 trillion. $7 trillion is extraordinary.
But let's go back.
Let's give you credit for it. The question is
only $7 trillion. What was the entire FDI during the Biden administration?
I'm not going to tell you that this is not extraordinary. The question is whether the public is being told the right amount.
Well, the thing is, again, we have asymmetric information.
Right.
We know which companies have committed to reshore production as part of that. We arrived, and back to the China relationship, that I always say we do not want to decouple. We want to de-risk.
CEOs of public companies, they've been very reluctant to battle a president who has not been shy about retaliating. Even when the president launches policies, they're going to hurt their bottom lines, right? The thinking has been, yes, tariffs might shrink their profits, but these CEOs also have mergers that they want the administration to bless.
The contrast here is sharp. One side paints a picture of confident investment and economic certainty, but the other shows leaders of major companies staying silent out of fear. Growth built on fear is not real growth. It is pressure disguised as strength. When CEOs feel they cannot speak honestly because they might jeopardize mergers or trigger investigations, then the business climate is no longer free. And if companies expand because they fear political consequences rather than believing in long-term stability, that weakens the foundation of the entire economy. The claim of certainty fades the moment businesses admit they cannot challenge policies without risking punishment. Real certainty comes from strong institutions, transparent rules, and stable leadership, not from unpredictable tariffs or sudden threats. A country that wants to de-risk must first remove fear from its own economy. Without fair treatment and open dialogue, companies hold back, innovation slows, and workers lose opportunities. Stability isn't built by pressure. It's built by trust.
The administration has talked about $21 trillion in investment being made in the U.S. This is according to Bloomberg, so you can go after them if you want to go after them. They say over a review of the 137 projects on the White House's webpage, they believe there's only $7 trillion in pledges that could be considered real investment.
Well, first of all, let's go back to that.
Okay.
Only $7 trillion. Say that again.
By the way, I'm not dismissing $7 trillion. $7 trillion is extraordinary.
But let's go back.
Let's give you credit for it. The question is
only $7 trillion. What was the entire FDI during the Biden administration?
I'm not going to tell you that this is not extraordinary. The question is whether the public is being told the right amount.
Well, the thing is, again, we have asymmetric information.
Right.
We know which companies have committed to reshore production as part of that. We arrived, and back to the China relationship, that I always say we do not want to decouple. We want to de-risk.
Right.
And everyone who was in the administration the past 4 years should be ashamed because they did nothing to de-risk. So whether it's semiconductors, and I will tell you, back to Taiwan, the single greatest economic threat is that the single point of failure for the global economy would be the disruption on chips from the island of Taiwan.
Why are they moving again? Tariffs. I mean, this just gives you an indication. Say tariffs effect on prices in the short term. Increase in March, 72%. 72% of Americans believe that tariffs raise prices in the short term in March. You come over to October, Donald Trump's been making the argument.
Here, the long-term danger becomes clear. Large investment numbers sound impressive, but ordinary Americans judge policies by what they feel today. And today, people feel rising prices and shrinking purchasing power. When 72% believe tariffs raise prices, it is not a theoretical debate. It is lived experience. Families don't care whether the number is $21 trillion or $7 trillion. They care whether groceries cost more this week than last week. At the same time, tying national security to unpredictable tariff policies creates another risk. A single disruption in Taiwan could shake the entire global chip supply, Yet tariff instability weakens the partnerships needed to protect that supply. Economic security and national security cannot be separated, and both crumble when policy is driven by threats, not strategy. A strong nation requires stable alliances, strong supply chains, and policies that support workers instead of burdening them. We choose stability, not chaos. We choose fairness, not fear. And we choose a future where economic power serves people, not the other way around. A better path forward is possible. We build resilient supply chains that don't depend on political shocks. Support small businesses with predictable policies and affordable imports. Strengthen guardrails around presidential economic power to protect democracy and markets. America moves forward when people rise, not when pressure rises. This is the moment to demand clarity, fairness, and stability. And if you believe in facts, in accountability, and in a stronger economic future, stay engaged, stay informed, and join the movement for better leadership.